Looking at example 1, the purpose here is to express percents and decimals as parts of a whole. The first problem is talking about Teddy and how much time he's spending doing his homework. I bet we're all kind of feeling this one right now. The way that the world has changed and the way that homework has changed, I don't know how much time you're spending. I don't know how much time I'm spending either. The portion of the time that Teddy spends doing homework for each subject is shown in the bar diagram. Do you remember the last time you used a bar diagram? They came up on our ratios unit. How can you write the amount of time Teddy spends on reading or science as a fraction, decimal, and a percent? Fractions, decimals, and percents are 3 ways to show parts of a whole. This is important. This is going to come up later. How can you use reasoning to write quantities as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent? So you want to think that all of these pieces are part of this whole. Here's the whole. This is how much time Teddy is spending on homework all together. And whether it's represented as a percent, as a fraction, or as a decimal, it's all showing a piece of this whole amount of time, this 100% of time that Teddy is spending on his homework. So think about the purpose of our lesson today is to show the relationship between fractions, decimals, and percents. So let's think. First, we can take this 30%. That's the time that Teddy is spending on his reading homework. 30% is the same as 30 out of 100 or 3/10. You can write the percent as a fraction with 100 as the denominator, so percent to fraction. You can also write a fraction with a denominator of 10 or 100 as a decimal. We know that 3/10 can be written as 3/10, 1 decimal and a 3. 30/100 is 30/100. So 30% can be written as 30 out of 100 or 3/10 and 30/100 or 3/10. The same thing works when we're starting with a decimal and converting to a percent. If I have 10/100, remember saying it out loud is key. 10/100. That's the same as the fraction 10/100 or 10 out of 100. 10/100 is 10%. Because remember, percent means out of 100. So if your number is already, your numerator is out of a denominator of 100, the numerator is the percent. You can also write an equivalent fraction. 10 over 100, or 10 out of 100, divided by 10 is 1/10. So 10/100 can be written as 10/100 or 1/10 and 10%. Now, Anna spends 45/100 of her homework time on reading. Think 45/100. That should be a giveaway for you right there. 45/100 looks like this is a fraction. 45/100. Write it as a percent. Well, 45 out of 100, I have a denominator of 100 already, which means that this 45 is the percent. So when you think out of 100, straight to the percent. So what relationship do you see when you compare an equivalent fraction and a percent? What's happening is that when your denominator is 100, the numerator of the fraction is the same as the percent. So 2 things that are really important to remember so far. I'm going to star these. One of your goals is to try to get a denominator of 100. Another important thing to remember is to read fractions and decimals properly out loud. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. In example 2, we're going to express fractions as parts of a whole. So you see the same bar diagram that you were looking at on the previous page. Teddy's spending 3/5 of his homework time doing math problems. Write 3/5 as a decimal and a percent. So previously, we were working back and forth between percents and decimals, and I was also using fractions showing how you could work things with a denominator of 100. In this problem, we're specifically looking at the fraction, and the fraction is 3/5. It's right here, in the middle of the bar diagram. It's the amount of time he spends on math. There's 2 ways that you can take the fraction 3/5 and you can convert that to a percent. The first way is to use division to find the decimal. Call this one way. So when you use division to find the decimal, you're dividing the numerator by the denominator. Because remember, that fraction bar actually means divide. And we've talked about this a couple times throughout the year. I'm going to write this down. Recall, the fraction bar means divide. So when you're dividing and your numerator is smaller than your denominator, you're going to have to annex zeros to divide 3 by 5. So when you insert the decimal point, annex a 0, and divide until the problem works out. 3/5 can be written as 6/10 or 60/100 based on division. When I look at 60/100, I think 60/100. It's out of 100, which means this is 60%. So there's one way, divide. Another way is to use equivalent rates or equivalent fractions to determine your percent. When I think about 3/5, I'm setting this up as a proportion. 3/5 is equal to something out of 100. And I have to think to myself, how many times do I have to multiply 5 to get to 100 and 3 to get to whatever this number is? Now down here, the way the textbook is set it up is they multiply by 20 and multiply by 20. You should be familiar with this from your ratios unit when we were working with our ratio tables and we were showing our hops. We did the same thing, it just looked a little bit different. So 5 times 20 is 100, 3 times 20 is 60. We got the same 60 out of 100 that we got here, and we know that 60 out of 100 is 60%. So there's your 2 ways to take a fraction to a percent, divide, or use an equivalent fraction or equivalent rate method. Later, I'm going to come up with another video, and we're going to create an anchor chart of equivalent fractions. Make sure that you view the second video with the equivalent fractions anchor chart after you view the video with all of the examples. All right, example 3. Use division with equivalent rates to express fractions as parts of a whole. Still looking at Teddy's homework, but now we've added in his friend Jacob. Teddy's friend Jacob spends 5/8 of his homework time doing math problems. Write 5/8 as a decimal and as a percent. Use division to find the decimal. Now in this problem, when I'm thinking about 5/8 and I'm thinking about the denominator of 8, there really aren't any easy ways for me to get from 5/8 to something out of 100. If I think to myself, what do I need to multiply 8 by to get to 100? No, nothing's really coming to mind. This method isn't going to work this time. We're going to have to use division in order to come up with a decimal and then change that decimal into a fraction and a percent. Going about it the same way, 5 divided by 8, again, annexing zeros until you've divided it all the way out, 5/8 can be written as 625 thousandths. Again, back to that key point I said earlier, reading it properly really helps. 625 thousandths. All right, so what do we do with this decimal 625 thousandths? Well, we're going to take 625 thousandths and change that into a rate or fraction. 625 out of 1,000. Well, 1,000 isn't going to help me because I need this to be out of 100. Remember, percent out of 100. So I'm taking my 625 out of 1,000. When I divide both the numerator and the denominator by 10, now I do have a fraction out of 100. 62.5 or 62 5/10 out of 100. Once I have a denominator of 100, the numerator is the percent. When my denominator is 100, my numerator is the percent. So 62.5 out of 100 means it's 62.5%. So let's see. Teddy is spending 62.5% of his homework time on math, and it looks like Teddy is spending 60% of his homework time on math. So Jacob is spending more time on his homework. Oh, Isabel. Isabel is spending 3/8 of her homework time on reading. What is 3/8 as a decimal and a percent? We're going to go about this the same way. We need to divide 3 by 8. 3 divided by 8. Start by annexing a 0. How many times does 8 go into 30? Let's see. 8 times 4 is 32. That's too high. 8 times 3 is 24. 30 minus 24 is 6. Annex another 0. 60. 7 times 8 is 56. Let's see. That's 4. Annex another 0. Perfect. 8 goes into 45 times, and that works out exactly the way I want it. So 3 divided by 8 is 375 thousandths. 3/8 is 375 thousandths, which is 375 thousandths. Remember, I need a denominator of 100, not 1,000. So divide by 10 tenths. I end up with 37.5 out of 100. Remember that when your denominator is 100, the numerator is the percent. So 37.5% is how much time Isabel spends on her reading homework. All right, that wraps it up for the 3 examples. The next segment is going to be making an anchor chart of equivalent fractions that lead to easy percents, and we'll also have another video segment which will be an answer key of the rest of the practice problems for the book. Thanks for tuning in.